New York State is one of the Democrats' most reliable when it comes to winning presidential and federal elections. New York hasn't voted for a Republican for president since 1984, and yet you have some people on the right saying that a red New York is around the corner, given the fact that Lee Zeldin and Republicans got so close in 2022, as well as a recent Sienna College poll, which has Donald Trump only down by 10 points. And we're certainly going to talk about that, as well as New York's broader political shift, because I think there is a red shift happening in certain areas of New York, but when you look at New York State as a whole, I think the issue is a lot more complicated than just the state is trending Republican. I think there are some areas that are certainly trending Republican and some that are trending very Democrat. So we're going to talk about that throughout this video in just a sec, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So this is the poll that a lot of people are talking about. It was released a couple of days ago, and it has Donald Trump at 37% of the vote, which is about where he was at in 2020. So right away, I don't understand all the excitement about this poll, because that's basically Trump's baseline in the state. And I will get to it later in this video, but I do think New York's probably going to trend slightly more Republican in 2024. But you have a lot of people saying that the state is going to be within 10 points or even 15, and I think that's totally ridiculous. But when we look at this poll overall, Joe Biden's at 47%. And in the last couple of polls going back all the way to August of last year, Joe Biden doesn't get over 50% of the vote. Now, I think this is mainly a symptom of the fact that Joe Biden is very unpopular nationwide. And even in the state of New York, his numbers could certainly be a lot better. So that's probably one of the reasons why you're seeing Joe Biden polling so low overall. Also, New York is a safe state. Polling in safe states, especially where the Democratic vote is usually concentrated in one or two metro areas, tends to be a bit skewed. New York as a whole, obviously, New York City is the Democratic anchor of the entire state. But even if you take New York City out, New York is still a blue state, albeit it's more blue like Michigan or something like that, but it's certainly not a Republican state if New York City's taken out. I think many people outside of New York have misconceptions for how red upstate New York is. Upstate New York is not really that red. If you take out New York City overall, I'm pretty sure Hillary Clinton either narrowly wins or loses the state in 2016, and then in 2020, I think Biden wins New York by a decent margin, lean or likely, something like that. I mean, it's single digits, but, New York without New York City would be voting more in line with the Rust Belt, if anything, than some sort of red state. But looking at the crosstabs of this poll, already I think it's a bit dubious, because you have the question of whether or not the respondents would vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And if you take a look at the white vote here, Joe Biden is winning the white vote by 1 point, which isn't that surprising because he won the white vote back in 2020. But also you have African Americans, 27% for Donald Trump. You could throw that out the window. That's completely unrealistic. And Donald Trump only being within 10 points with Latinos, I think is also kind of ridiculous. Also, you have way too many undecideds in this poll. So again, 37% is probably a good baseline for Donald Trump, but him losing the state by only 10 points, I think is totally ridiculous. And I think a lot of people are reading way too much into the 2022 governor's race. And we'll talk about that, because that's one of the main reasons people think New York is shifting red. The New York governor's race was sort of a perfect storm for Republicans. And even then, they still ended up losing by like 7 points. But it was a combination of crime being a massive issue, of course, in the city, voters thinking that Democrats weren't doing anything about it. Kathy Hochul being sort of arrogant about her chances of winning, really didn't take the race seriously until about August or September. So you had that aspect as well. Lee Zeldin was actually on the ground campaigning all across the state. And that certainly had an impact. And then also you have to factor in the issue of messaging, which is sort of tied into Kathy Hochul not taking the race seriously. Lee Zeldin ran a very smart campaign, sort of tucked away his Trumpy elements that would have made him unelectable in the state, and really focused on crime, cost of living, but crime was the main issue. And Kathy Hochul did not take the issue of crime seriously. She still doesn't take the issue of crime seriously. And that's one of the reasons why you saw such a massive shift in New York. Now, what's interesting about the map here electorally is that you have Columbia County, for instance, which is a county that Mark Molinaro won in 2018. And again, he lost by 25 points or something to Andrew Cuomo. So you have these counties in upstate New York. Schenectady is another one. And funny enough, Trump, I believe, won Schenectady, or no, he lost Schenectady. Mark Molinaro also won Schenectady County back in 2018, and then Lee Zeldin ends up losing it by around 2 points. So you have upstate counties in New York where, even though the state has shifted way to the right overall when it comes to the vote margin, a lot of these counties have actually trended left. And one of the reasons for that is you've had a lot of people from the city, Manhattan in particular, who during COVID moved up to upstate New York, especially now that you have like remote work and things like this. And these areas have gotten very blue very quickly. They're also highly educated counties, so Donald Trump and Republicans have also had a drop off there. But even if you look at 2016, you know, Columbia County was a blue county, but Hillary Clinton only won it by around 5 points. Dutchess County, Hillary Clinton barely wins the county. If you go to 2022, Zeldin barely wins the county, wins it by 4 points. So a lot of these counties in the Hudson Valley have actually trended left pretty significantly as compared to the rest of the state. Now, Long Island is where you saw the biggest shift probably towards Republicans. And part of that's because Lee Zeldin's from Long Island, but part of it's also because of the turnout differential. Lee Zeldin got 330,000 votes in Suffolk County, which happens to be his home county. He used to represent most of it in the 1st Congressional District. But if you take a look at the 2020 election, Donald Trump gets 380,000 votes in Suffolk County. Now, obviously, a governor's race is not going to have the same turnout as a presidential, but you also have to keep in mind that Republicans were much more motivated to vote in New York in 2022 than Democrats were. If we take a look at Nassau County, 326,000 votes for Donald Trump in Nassau County. Lee Zeldin gets 286,000. So while Lee Zeldin had to win a significant portion of Democrats to get these margins in these counties, it's certainly not something that I think was a Herculean feat by any metric, because he didn't beat Donald Trump's overall top line vote. Whereas if you go to Maryland, for instance, with Larry Hogan in some counties was doing better than Mitt Romney did in 2012, or almost as well, in a massively low turnout election where you had a massive drop in turnout. So this really was a case of Republicans having exceptionally high turnout, especially in the Adirondack and Western New York areas. But also Kathy Hochul doing better in the upstate cities than Andrew Cuomo did. Andrew Cuomo was uniquely popular in upstate New York. Had Lee Zeldin had similar shifts in Onondaga County, Monroe County, Erie County, as he did in downstate, he probably would have won the governor's race. Because if you take a look at his margins in New York City, they're about where you need them to win the state overall. You have 37% in Queens. You've got Brooklyn about 30%, the Bronx 22%. So obviously he could have had improvements in the city. But it was upstate New York in places like Westchester where Lee Zeldin didn't meet the metrics he needed to actually flip the state. So 2022 is more or less a microcosm. You know, I think New York Republicans certainly have a chance to win the governorship potentially in 2026 with the right candidate and the right national environment. But, you know, I really think Kathy Hochul's arrogance in this was a huge factor, because had she taken the race seriously from the beginning, had she been more popular with Democratic voters and independents more broadly, this race would have not been remotely close. And I think Zeldin was also sort of that unique candidate that could sort of thread the needle in a Youngkin type way. And while he didn't win, he got New York down to single digits, which is very impressive. Now, I don't think this has any bearing on 2024. Joe Biden is still overall, depending on the poll you look at least single digits up in terms of approval rating. But this is federally a very blue state. And when you're losing places like Onondaga County by 20 points, you know, Rochester by 20 points, Erie County, you have no chance of winning the state of New York at large. You need to win these counties outright and then run absolutely massive margins in the rural counties of upstate New York. But again, as I said, a lot of these counties, especially in the Hudson Valley, are trending leftward. So while you do have marginal trends in the city, if we look at the shift from 2012, yeah, you've got a 12-point shift in the Bronx, because I think Trump only got like 9% in the Bronx. But yeah, 9% back in 2016. So a 12-point shift, you know, decently significant. You had shifts in all the boroughs of New York City, but at the end of the day, New York still voted to the left of where it was in 2016. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won by around 22 points. In 2020, it was a 23-point margin. Even though the city trended rightward by 7-8 points in some cases, the state at large trended to the left. Long Island, you know, Suffolk County, 6 points to the left. Nassau County also saw a leftward trend. And of course, all of upstate New York basically trended left. So, you know, while we think of the New York City area as the most important part of the state, even though it trended towards the Republicans, and again, New York could have shifted a lot more left than it did had New York also shifted with it, but it still wasn't enough of a redward shift to even move the state at large towards the right in 2020. So I think it's very unrealistic to say that New York's going to have some massive rightward shift. You know, could Donald Trump get 38% of the vote in New York State? Probably. But you have some people saying that he's going to win Nassau County, Long Island, which I think is totally ridiculous. Nassau County hasn't gone red since 1988. And, you know, it's a suburban, densely populated, college-educated county. You know, you're not going to see shifts like that. Suffolk County is a bit different. It's a bit more white working class than Nassau. You know, could you see a rightward shift there potentially? I mean, in 2016, you had, you know, Donald Trump winning Suffolk County by around 7 points. So, you know, it's maybe not unrealistic to say that Suffolk could trend rightward, but also Long Island and New York in general has seen a mass exodus of Republicans. So even if you have a decent base of voters who are coming out to vote for Republicans, that base is leaving the state at record numbers. And, you know, perhaps in 2022, you know, had New York had the population it did, say, in 2010, you probably would have seen Lee Zeldin win the governor's race. But I don't think you're going to see some massive swing in New York City in favor of the GOP. 2022 was an off-year election. It had special circumstances. Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I think, is a very different dynamic than Kathy Hochul versus Lee Zeldin. Lee Zeldin had moderate appeal, obviously. Kathy Hochul was sort of kryptonite to independent and moderate voters, which is why she almost lost. It was really only because Democrats bothered to come out at all that she actually held on in this race. I think in terms of New York at large, you could see a couple point shifts towards the right, but I don't really think that's going to have the down ballot effect a lot of Republicans are hoping for. Because if we take a look at the congressional map of New York City and the broader New York area, none of the New York City districts are competitive at all. You know, the 11th district is effectively a Republican district, and you have all the rest of New York City safe Democratic. So, you know, say Donald Trump gains another 10 points in Queens or in the Bronx, it's going to have no impact whatsoever on congressional races down ballot because these districts are already so safely Democratic, and there's probably going to be a drop-off as well. You're probably going to have people voting for Donald Trump potentially in these urban areas, and then also voting for down ballot Democrats. So I don't think the shift in New York is going to be significant enough to actually sway any of these races. The only way it would be is if you see a red shift on Long Island, which again, you could see in Suffolk County, maybe a bit in Nassau as well, because, you know, the first, second districts are somewhat competitive. You know, the third district, I think, was drawn more Democratic. So it's effectively safe Democrat now, especially with Tom Suozzi. And you have the fourth district, which is slightly bluer, I think, than it was in 2022. But of course, in 2022, Lee Zeldin won the fourth district, and Joe Biden's going to win the fourth district in 2024 by well over 10 points, most likely. So I don't really think Republicans are going to gain anything when it comes to the congressional map from this red shift. They just better hope that their incumbents are strong enough to hold on and there's a decent amount of split ticket voting. Because again, most of the shift is going to be among urban minority voters in New York City. But again, all of these districts are safe blue anyway, so they're not going to have any real impact on the congressional races at all. I mean, the most competitive districts are a lot more demographically less diverse than New York City, you know, the 19th in upstate New York. On Long Island, you know, it's really just the first and second district, but, you know, Garbarino in the second district is going to hold on. And I think the first district as well, even though Trump won it by 2, it's probably going to end up going Republican again, at least when it comes to the congressional district. So you've really only got a couple of conceivably competitive races. The 4th congressional district, the 19th with Mark Molinaro, and obviously the 17th with Lawler. The 22nd with Brandon Williams has been drawn in a safe Democratic district now, so, you know, he's going to go on to lose more than likely. So there's really only a couple of races to focus on in New York, and I think overall, this red shift, this marginal red shift we're going to see probably is not really going to benefit Republicans in the way that they're hoping, because I think a lot of them think that these gains are going to be more broadly across the state. I really only think it's going to be confined to urban areas because, according to polling, Joe Biden has been doing worse with Black and Latino voters, which could help Republicans in urban areas, because I think in competitive districts, they're much less of a factor, and I don't really think they're going to be able to outvote leftward trending white college-educated Democrats in this case. But anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in